So my name is Pauline Mazenod. As you can hear, I'm French. Windrose is an international distribution company based in Paris and in Bavaria, in Germany. We are 10-year-old. We acquire documentaries and performances from all over the world, and we sell them worldwide too. We work on projects and on completed films, series and one-off. We are interested in all kinds of documentaries, but we are mainly interested in some specific subjects. If you're interested, maybe later I can explain that. And we sell to mainly TV stations still, but also to VOD platforms through aggregators, to schools, I mean educational rights, and very often we sell through aggregators too. We also sell to in-flight companies and very often through aggregators too. And sometimes we still sell DVD rights, and some films have the potential to be seen in theaters. Yeah, that was me.
My name is Yael Strasberg, and I'm the Director of Acquisitions for Entertainment One Canada. We are an on-the-ground distributor worldwide. We have offices in Canada, the US, UK, Germany, Benelux, and Spain.
Hi, I'm Greg Rubidge. I'm the founder of Syndicado. We're a digital distribution company. Our focus has been on VOD for most of our company's history. In 2014, we started doing limited theatrical runs in the United States and Canada, and in 2016, we had a spin-off company, Syndicado Film Sales, which is focused primarily on the theatrical and festival documentaries. Our focus on the VOD and distribution side is across all genres now, and across TV and feature film.
Hi, I'm John Bain. I'm with Levelfilms. We're just a more or less traditional distributor based in Toronto, and we handle indie films. Mostly distribute within Canada, but we also do it in the US and sometimes worldwide, depending on the film.
Hi there, my name is James Finlay. I'm the Director of Distribution and Sales at Juice Worldwide. We provide media processing and digital distribution services to the leading streaming platforms. We distribute content worldwide across any genre or type, whether it's to Netflix, Amazon, Google, iTunes, or the major cable providers, both here in Canada, US, and internationally.
Hi, my name is Pierre-Alexandre Labelle. I co-founded a company called Under the Milky Way. We started a company in 2010 to provide digital distribution services, which we do now on pretty much on a global basis. We have offices in over 10 countries, and we mostly provide services for distributors themselves in order to get their content up on either global digital platforms or local providers in various countries.
So the next question is, basically, could you guys elaborate a little bit on what the difference is between the traditional distribution and the digital distribution and aggregation for some of the people who may not? Oh, sorry. We wanted to discuss the differences between what a traditional distributor does versus what an aggregator would do for independent producer.
I can start. It's more of a semantic difference. There's not a real substantial difference really between an aggregator and a distributor. It's what you want to call yourself or what other people call you. You're both, or neither are content creators generally, although you can get involved at different stages of production, and you're distributing the film to audiences, and it's, I guess you could say distributors tend to be more full service, and you'll do the marketing, and do the theatrical release, whereas aggregators tend to not do theatrical as much, and they tend to not do the marketing. They just get you on the platforms. But I mean, maybe one of our aggregator friends can can say whether or not there's, but as I say, there's not a huge difference between the two.
Yeah, well, I guess it's mostly the distribution channel itself. I mean, sometimes producers will come to us and say, well, we have this film and we want to get it out there. And the first questions we'll ask is, what's your objective and where do you want to take your film? If the answer is we want to do a festival run or we want to take it out theatrically, well, we say we're not the right partners for you. But whenever you decide to put your film online and you've reached that point in your release strategy, then you can talk with us and we can definitely help you in the whole process of making that happen, and then work on marketing, but dedicated to digital channels as well. So we won't buy space at a bus stop with the poster of your film, but rather do some Facebook ads and try to find ways to market and promote your film that's adapted to digital distribution. So for me, the main difference is really a distribution channel, which is not the same.
I will echo on that. I think the term has just come up. Like the medium's always evolving, and the nuances of the distribution channels evolve. So from when I started, I had clients that were existing distributors, like Pauline, and my focus was purely on digital outlets. So iTunes, Google, Amazon, new outlets as they emerge. And our clients that would be traditional did continue to do sales to broadcasters if they were primarily a TV distributor, or festivals or in-flight, what would be considered traditional. I think it's also a bleed over from the United States where you had a lot of home video. DVD would be considered traditional. I have some clients who are, still have a basement full of DVDs because they got pinched when the thing shifted, and they were not set up. They're, smaller shops, and they weren't set up to do all that's required from both a business development perspective, but also a tech perspective, to launch in the digital space. So they continued as a traditional, distributor, kind of watching their, VOD or DVD revenue come under stress, shall we say, but maintained, going to the market, still trying to sell for TV, and still performing acquisitions. And we still work with those. I think that, where there's some, and also on the theatrical side would be considered traditional. So it's just where people came at this industry. Along the way, that clients that we had from back in, say, 2009, 2010 have kind of seen where things are going. Some have become our competitors. And along the way, we've kind of like partnered with other competitors to take advantages if we can. But yeah, sometimes it is semantics, traditional, but it just means what, pre-digital almost is what they're doing. And now they either continue to do that, and partner with companies to do digital, which could be an aggregator or a digital distributor. But that's kind of, I see the shift in that. And, we could throw it out what's the difference between an aggregator and a distributor. It's just, I find the term aggregator is more of an American term, that it's more of a tech term. Like there were news aggregators, you'd go to, say, Flipboard or, as a news source. They aggregate news, and somehow it got lumped into digital. But I say we're a digital distributor. It's like instead of working with Target and Kmart and, Woolco, or, well, I'm dating myself, but I mean, like older, things selling them DVDs, our retailers are all digital retailers. But
aggregators, I think it's important to know that you deal with big packages of films, where we distributors tend to work film by film. But I like what you said, Pierre-Alexandre. I think the first step is really what is the dream of the producer for his film. And this is where we start, and we discuss, and we discuss the strategy. If we find out that the dream is VOD, for example, or Netflix, then we tell them, okay, go directly to Netflix. You don't need us. Because sometimes producers think we have better access and they need us. Maybe it's true, but if you need only Netflix, why should you work with us? Go directly. If it's only VOD, it's the same. Either you go directly to one niche VOD platform. Imagine you've got a gay content. Maybe you can go directly to gay VOD platforms. If you want to reach more platforms, you can go to an aggregators. But I think not all films have a potential everywhere, more and more, and this is where we act. We build a strategy. We try to place the films where they have the most potential, And in this strategy, very often we work with more and more with VOD aggregators.
I should also mention that for us, like, we take a philosophical approach where it's very much trying to broaden our distribution footprint so that we can enable producers to access the broadest variety of platform destinations that they can get, and sort of that's how we try to enable the content to get out of there.
I mean, in any way you look at it, though, you need, if you're a producer of an individual film, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to make sales to anybody. You know, Netflix or anybody else wants to go through somebody that has lots of films. It's just ease of information flow and ease of delivery. So it's just very difficult for you to go directly with anyone. So you mostly have to go through somebody at some stage, whether it's a distributor or an aggregator.
And so if it was a young filmmaker was looking to find the right fit for their project, let's say specifically in Canada, where the telefilm model is traditional theatrical releasing, on a smaller scale film, how would they determine who to go to versus aggregator versus distributor? Distribution, like, there's no MGs anymore, per se, for a smaller budget film. And so how would they work with an aggregator and to penetrate and have their film released in a way that's effective and gets them the most eyeballs?
Well, it depends on if telefilm will usually guide people to distributors, because generally if they're bigger films, a distributor has to be attached or telefilm won't give them funding. And they have certain distributors are approved or not approved based on experience, track record, and so on. On the smaller films that are usually budgeted under $2.5 million, you technically don't need a distributor attached prior to telefilm funding, but they still encourage it. And again, they have a list of distributors that they're comfortable dealing with. That's on Canadian stuff. I think aggregators tend to not ascribe any extra value to Canadian films versus international films, whereas distributors, it's a different economic model on Canadian films, and so it's more of a mandate for distributors. I mean, Yael can probably talk to this as well.
I mean, we operate as a traditional distributor. We do traditional releases, so anything that we acquire, we do acquire to release theatrically. And that typically involves us coming on board early, especially with telefilm-funded projects. And yeah, you like John said, you need a distributor on board in order to trigger those funds. So,
in terms of digital distribution, do you find that you come on a little as early as, say, a traditional distributor would?
I would say not typically. We tend to come on usually when at the earliest when a project's at a post-production phase or it's finishing. That's when we like to start having a conversation about what the filmmaker's objective is and what they're hoping to accomplish. You know, with respect to Canada and, you know, what our role is here in Canada, I mean, you know, if you're hoping to just focus on this territory, then we likely will encourage our partners to seek out a Canadian-based distributor to help them really achieve the best that they can in this market. But if they are hoping to go beyond the borders and hit a very broad audience and get recognition via that route, then we certainly encourage them to sort of mix and match. So, you know, make a sale for Canadian rights here, US rights, maybe UK rights, and then let's fill in the blanks for the remaining spots.
Is there anything else that you think a filmmaker or producer should consider when they're looking to identify a partner?
I mean, you can always, Yael and I were just talking about this earlier. I mean, you can always just like look at films that you liked and, you know, contact the people that were involved in the making of those films. Basically, it's a numbers game. So I think if you just ask one person to be your distributor aggregator, or, you know, what if they say no? What are you going to do? So I think you have to reach out to basically everybody you know and see who's interested. And if they have multiple parties that are interested, that's a good, you know, problem to have. So ideally, you're picking somebody who totally gets your project, but you don't always have that luxury. Sometimes you just can kind of take what you can get. But not all hope is not lost. And you can always just release a film yourself. you know, it's not impossible. It's just a little harder. And if you're a filmmaker, do you really want to be spending your time releasing your own film, or do you want someone else to do it? And you're willing to give up a fee to have that done? That's a question that you have to figure out for yourself. But there's no one way to do it. There's lots of different ways you can do it.
I think it's also important to note that all the Canadian distributors acquire and release very different films, so it's approaching the distributor that might be the best fit for your film.
I've got one question. Do you work more with distributors or producers? I'm asking to aggregators.
Oh, I would say, frankly, the split, when you look at our customer base, our client base, you know, there is actually a substantial number of distributors in the mix there. I would say perhaps in terms of you're looking at the amount of content that comes out, maybe 50%. And then underneath that, we have 20% that are production companies, and then the remainder would be independent filmmakers and producers.
Yeah, it's very, very similar for us. But the content that we do get from distributors tend to be films that were previously released in the territory theatrically, so that would have gained more promotion, and it's more recognized by the audience and will, in the end, perform much better. I think for independent producers to go directly to the digital route today, I think it's important to understand that it's a very challenging environment, especially financially speaking. If you're looking to distribute your film in digital and recoup the cost of production, I think we would all agree to say that this will be tricky. But you know, it's the way it is, and it's important to keep that in mind. I think this will change in the future. There will be some shifts, and we're seeing this today because the digital landscape itself is also varied. There's on the one side what we call transactional VOD, so that's a retailing business model. It's like iTunes or Google Play, where people actually rent or buy the film, and then there's a profit share that goes all the way back down to the rights holder, which was the first VOD model to establish itself. And over the past couple of years, we've seen that model really starting to slow down and being replaced increasingly by SVOD, so subscription video on demand, essentially Netflix. And that's a whole different ballgame. Even for us, it's very complicated. Whereas in the beginning, they were interested in getting access to a lot of content, and we sold them hundreds of films. And now they're moving more towards original content production, which can be a very good thing for producers that do get to work with them at that level. But if you don't work with them at that level, you have to understand as well that it's going to be very hard unless your film is something very incredible that finally fits their editorial line. But it's going to be very hard to license it to them at a later stage. So therefore remains only the transactional VOD side of things, and perhaps some local SVOD providers in other territories. So yeah, so if it all depends on what you're looking to do and what you're trying to achieve. I would tend to recommend today, if you have a sales agent and an all rights distributor that's interested in your film, to go down that route. I know it's not very good for my business, but still to go down that route first and foremost, because it's probably where you'll get the most revenues and the most exposure and so forth. And if that doesn't work and it's not, let's say, a possibility for you, then digital distribution could be an alternative. But understanding what it means and what it entails.
So I think, yeah, you mentioned sales agent, which seems to have been outside of the conversation today. So it depends really where you're at in the life cycle of your film. If it's a new film, you know, although they're, you know, on panels from probably, you know, 2011 to 16, it was all about direct to fan, you know, or direct to your audience platforms, and there's only one that's really alive today, because direct to fan it was more of a pipe dream. I mean, a great case study at a panel. There's one person that made a lot of money in the first week, and then that model's changed. So yes, it's still going through the massive, you know, because most of the world, in the digital landscape, the infrastructure set up to bring people to, you know, iTunes, Google, Amazon. It wasn't set up to have the whole audience find this, you know, Yekra, if you remember that, or Distrify, or, you know, now it's the one that's remaining is Vimeo. And they've had to change their model. So if it's a new film, you want to find a sales agent. If it's a feature film, the role of the sales agent working with you is kind of, after you get it funded in Canada, it's bringing it to the international marketplace. And festivals are basically a cotillion for your film. It's like attracting distributors at the local level. So your sales agent would work with a distributor in a local territory where they have the relationships. Either they do digital themselves, whether they work with an aggregator. But if they're putting up a fee for that territory, most likely they'll take all rights for it. And then, if there are territories that aren't sold, and again, some of our clients are distributors, some are other sales agents, but if there are territories that are not sold, that's when you would look at like the next opportunity down. Digital is it is a numbers game. It's very uncertain. So still, you could have faith in your project, and everyone likes to think they make a few $100,000 on iTunes. If there's a broadcaster waving a check that you're happy with, I think most people are inclined to go with the check, and with that check come restraints around your project. So, as I've learned in the last 2 years, having working with somebody, it's my colleague is the primary driver of the sales agency, and it's out of Europe. You look for the higher value opportunities first for your film, and then you see what other opportunities kind of further down the path. So I would say new film sales agent. If you're sitting with a library that's kind of had its run through the international marketplace from 5 to 8 years, then digital is a great opportunity for it. Will it make money? I don't know, but it'll be out there, and that's kind of our goal, is to get it in as many different platforms so people can discover it. And there's a company, we work with Frantic, and we've got some of their library titles, and they've done exceedingly well on VOD, and surprisingly so. So it's why it's tough to say right now going direct to digital, unless you're working with a platform like Hulu or Netflix that are funding original thing. Going direct to digital, it's too uncertain. Like, nobody can tell you that, oh yeah, well, even if we get you on the homepage of iTunes, that it will sell. It's too uncertain. So the whole, the legacy of what the industry was, where there was some predictability, there was a gate for financing. Not everyone had their movies made. Now everyone in this room can get a camera at Best Buy and shoot a nice, nice looking movie, which is great. It's cheaper to make a movie, but there's more competition than ever before. So these are just some of the challenges we're facing, and so it's a long way of saying, usually the sales agent was missing from the conversation, but it really depends where your project is in the lifestyle. Is it new? Different strategy. Like Pauline said, what are your goals for the film? If it's older, digital is like the next best place for it.
And it's really changing for sales agents as well, and I think Pauline can probably tell us a bit more about that. But I feel that, especially in the film world, so for feature films and so forth, the sales agent's job is moving towards licensing for festivals, for smaller festivals around the world that will pick up the film just to present it in the festival and pay a festival fee. And the sales agents have very good relationship with festivals, so they're able to manage that part. But the all-right sales to local distributors, we're seeing this model being ever more difficult. And sales agents were turning towards Netflix and so forth, saying, well, you can buy my film and so forth. And that's also becoming much harder for them. And most sales agents I know are now facing a point where they've seen their job change dramatically over the years, and now reach a point where they really have to refocus on what's essential to them and how they can evolve in the future.
I've got another question, sorry. Do you still sell to Netflix, or do you hope still to sell to them? A question to aggregators, of course.
Yeah, we certainly do. We certainly do. There was obviously a larger volume that we sold, let's say around up to 2016, the end of 2016, and then I would say it dipped 2017, dipped even further 2018, but we're seeing, at least for us, we're seeing that activity resume in earnest. Obviously with the greater spend in the original space, so Netflix going direct to producers and filmmakers and creating content, that is becoming the new reality. But we have new SVOD entrants in the game that hopefully will start balancing out the overwhelming spot that Netflix has taken up in the market. So with Amazon Prime, there's certainly a great SVOD opportunity there. We do some licensing activity with them. And then we're really excited about Apple's foray into the SVOD space, and we're certainly looking forward to what opportunities that might present.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that we're not alone. I think we've followed the same trend a little bit. But I think working, especially as an aggregator, so in between a rights holder and a platform like Netflix, is quite tricky. Whereas for transactional VOD, when we do get a film into our systems and so forth, we can guarantee the job that we need to do, so that we will release the film, that it will be available, that we'll do the trade marketing, that we'll push it as much as possible, and more importantly, that royalties will be reported for and payments will be done in a timely fashion. And I feel very comfortable entering this relationship because I know where I come in and where I come out, and I control everything, so that's fine. Whereas with Netflix, at first we said, okay, well, we need to leverage our relationship with Netflix, so we know them. You know, we meet with them quite often, and we have dinners and stuff. And then we started having films, and we're starting to pitch films, and the answer is sometimes a clear no, which is great because we can go back and say it's no, and that's it. But most often than not, especially over the last few years, it was like, man, it's not a yes, it's not a no, it's just out there. And then it puts us in a very tricky position because rights holders come back to us and they're like, well, what's up? And we tell them, well, we're in this situation, and it's not very clear. And then we start to have to manage this, and to manage this relationship and manage the expectations. And at the end of the day, it's becoming, especially when you do this on a certain volume, it becomes unmanageable. And that's when we started to say to our rights holders, well, if you do want to get your films on Netflix, here are the contacts, get in touch. If it works, great. Sometimes deal happen and it would come back through us because Netflix would say, well, go back through Milky Way and so forth, and we would manage that, and that's fine. So there are various ways, but it's a tricky landscape. Well.
In terms of a practical question, P&A spend is something that's always sort of top of mind with filmmakers. I know traditional distributors in Canada are subsidized by entities like Telefilm. On the aggregation side, is it the onus is on the producer to provide those P&A funds? What would, for a small, low-budget film, what would be sort of the average that you'd be looking for? Because they'd have to budget for that.
You know, I'm not sure I can speak specifically to the actual exact dollar figure, right? Because that's going to be really dependent on the size of production and whatnot. I advocate that producers allocate a percentage of their budget based on their research of hiring a publicist or a marketing firm to help take that piece, and make sure that they lock that in there so that that money's available at the end of the project. I think the success of the model that an aggregator, or at least an aggregator like Juice represents, the success really hinges on the filmmaker and the producer having that allocation there, and then actually going down that path and making sure that when we come to launch time, you know, they've generated some activity via social media, maybe landing some interviews on popular film magazines, trades, whatnot, so that there is an audience there waiting to in fact view the film. You know, we do a little piece of, we make spots, trailers, posters, we adjust artwork, that sort of thing. It's very limited, so we really have to encourage folks to really bake that in from the outset of the project.
Yeah. It's again, it's a fairly complicated topic, I'd say. Over the years, we've spent quite a lot of money, mostly not our money, not our rights holders' money, but mostly public money, in order to test and try new marketing techniques, mostly through programs funded by the European Commission, where they would give us funds in order to experiment with P&A expenditures related to direct-to-digital releases. What we found is that we know how to spend the money. That's not a problem. You know, we can do Facebook ads, and the great thing with Facebook is that when you release on many territories, it's the same mechanism. So you can go in Facebook and prepare your campaign for Italy, for Spain, for the UK, for Germany, and it's only the language that changes. But you can all manage this under one single account. So everything in the traditional world that was very broken down on a territory per territory basis can now be managed in a more transversal manner, and that was one of the things that we found out. Second is that we started spending some money, and the return on investment was not there. So there may be some different reasons for that. I think there's a certain threshold effect. So if you do spend under that threshold, it's not worth it. And I think it's the same thing in traditional distribution. If you release your film in theaters and you'll only spend, I don't know, $5,000 to promote that film, might as well keep your $5,000 and do something else with it. But if you pass the, I don't know what it is in Canada, but maybe, I don't know, $50,000, and then it starts to have an impact and you can see that the needle moves. And I think it's the same thing in digital. So we need, and frankly, honestly, I don't think we've identified where that threshold lies as of today. But that's something that we definitely need to keep working on. And I think as an industry in general, if digital is the way forward, is to find the right levers to pull, and especially having the expertise to how to pull these levers in order to increase sales.
Yeah, there's no like set amount of money to spend, but there's certain hard costs when you're releasing a film that you can't avoid. You know, to develop the film in a format that Netflix can use or iTunes can put up, and so those are hard costs. The kind of discretionary amounts are more on the advertising side of things and somewhat on the publicity side of things. So it'd be tough to release a film, you know, legitimately and spend less than probably $10,000 in Canada at least, and that's with no advertising whatsoever. And so from that you can spend what you want. I quite agree with you. There's a certain floor below which if you spend it, you might as well not spend it because you're not breaking through the clutter. But there's no magic number to spend either. So you can kind of spend whatever you're comfortable at, but it's not yes, the more you spend, the more revenue you'll have probably, but sometimes they don't grow at the same rate. So you gotta be careful. Money doesn't solve all problems either, right? But it's a balance between how much money you have or your distributor has and how much risk you're willing to take. On Canadian films, you do get marketing assistance from Telefilm, but it is a loan, it's not a grant, and so it has to be paid back. But it definitely encourages distributors to be more aggressive on releasing films.
On the digital side, it's also a challenge, and yes, same misery deserves company. We face the same challenge, and there's another aggregator in the States, digital distributor, and I asked him the same thing, and he said, yeah, there was a threshold, but that was about 4 years ago where they had to spend at least 20 grand on Facebook. And, you know, case studies, usually on festivals or panels, they'll always show you the thing that worked, which is what everyone wants to know. But the challenge is if everyone in the room does the same thing, it's not gonna work. So I think it's just an economic thing. If everyone does the same thing. One way to market your film, if you want a budget, is like 15 to 20 grand, is what they call four-walling. It's where you rent the theater. And the trick, you know, when we started was people would, you know, it'd be in 4 cities, and if you were in New York and LA for 35 plays, which is 3 a day, you know, roughly, whatever, well, you know, a couple times a day for 1 week, then the New York Times and LA Times would write you up, and you get all the reviews in the press. People thinking 2 things. One, the press would, you know, people are supposed to care, they know about the film. The other is that it would get you into the new in theaters now folder in cable, and that was great for a while. Then everyone did that, so then the cable companies were like, now it has to be 8 cities, and it has to be these cities, and then it was 12, because everyone will just flock and do that thing, and it's just because you do it doesn't mean the film is great. Like, we work with a company in New York, and we had their films that were 4-walled, and usually if you have to pay somebody to play your film, you know, it's like great films sometimes sell themselves, so if you're paying somebody to play it, it is a marketing strategy, but it doesn't mean the film's great or will do great. On the social media side, again, we've hired PR agents, and they've never failed to deliver on getting PR. And we've got, you know, you can be written up in whatever magazine. I will say there is a change now. Being in the New York Times for movie review is probably less relevant for the audience that is watching things on digital as being on Twitch or Rue Morgue or with Rotten Tomatoes, all the online bloggers are the new influencers, I'd say more so than mainstream press. But just because you have press doesn't mean people will watch it. And that's again, like, this is an industry driven by, yes, numbers in the background, but passion, because every day, you're like, every day is an uncertain day. I don't know. If I knew, I'd only pick the films that make money. And I'd only get, do the PR things where I know it would translate into sales. It's been substantial what we've invested in theatrical and PR, like I say, but it doesn't translate into sales. We've had other titles that are like, digital titles that just get discovered on Amazon, and the numbers are through the roof. So there's been a disconnect. I mean, it would be great if you knew where you're spending, you get the money back, but we haven't to date really seen that return versus kind of just being out there or on different platforms. We have some series that have done extremely well for us on Hulu, but that hasn't translated into, say, other SVOD platforms. So it's really now the audiences that are developing around some of these platforms. I wish I had a message to say, do this, and it'll work for everyone. I'm telling you, for our real life experiences, that we try continually, we try to learn, but the predictability is a key challenge in our industry right now. Or lack of it, really.
But as it's the same for us, it means it's really the rule in the film industry, because I could say exactly the same. So it's not related to the digital world, it's related to the film industry.
Yeah, but before digital, there was this thing called DVDs, and I think when you did release DVDs, you had in your budget a sort of percentage that you would dedicate to marketing, and you had that fork where you knew exactly more or less what kind of revenues you could expect with that release. The market was quite contained from the offer point of view, and the industry was fairly stable for a few years, and there was a lot of money. But as we've seen over the years, this has almost completely disappeared. And on the other side, digital picked up, but never reached those levels of revenue, for sure, and of stability as well. And now the whole, as I was mentioning a bit earlier on, the whole digital landscape, and I think we share that, is changing also dramatically by moving from transactional towards subscription-based. And one of the issues with subscription-based VOD today is that there are very few actors that count out there. We can count them on one hand. They're all down south, and that's that, essentially.
But don't you think this is changing rapidly? That there are more and more actors, more VOD platforms who are emerging?
Well, yeah, but we were discussing that. We've seen some VOD actors emerging, but we've seen them fall as well and disappear. I think in the past few months we've seen, especially in the US, some VOD platforms or subscription services that we could look at and be quite excited about these platforms that they just went away.
But what about the niche VOD platforms?
That's exactly the ones that did go away.
Okay.
And it's a real challenge. I think today, if you want to launch an OTT platform of your own and say, oh, I'll have my own little Netflix in my corner and so forth, it's a real challenge. It's to get people to subscribe and to get people to adhere to your service. You need a lot of money to do this.
And part of the problem in Canada too is the way it's regulated or not regulated. So a lot of what underwrote Canadian production for many years were the broadcast sales in Canada on Canadian films. And the reason that happened was because there was content requirements for your licensing, so you had to buy Canadian films, and then you also contributed into the ecosystem through Media Fund. So the new entrants that are streamers, SVOD, Netflix for instance, don't have any content requirements. They don't have to buy Canadian films, and they don't do it, at least in feature films, or they don't ascribe any premium to that. So that's part of a problem, which is, so broadcasters are getting hurt by the level field not being, or the playing field not being level. So that has to be addressed. And I know it was kind of a problem with the CRTC, which regulates broadcasting but doesn't regulate streamers, and that's a problem. That has to be addressed. Everyone acknowledges it's a problem. That's a specific problem for Canadian producers of Canadian content, although other territories of the world have similar problems.
There are some niches that are doing okay. I find that there's the LGBT niche. There's like 3 SVOD services. So there's some, but for independent film, like The Home there's Fandor. They just they're in trouble. Okay, so yeah, you got the letter. There's Filmstruck had problems. They were like a Criterion. Now there's Mubi. Like Mubi started years ago, and they tried to be all things to like independent film globally, and it was a terrible user experience because you go and it wouldn't be available in your territory. So rather than trying to be everything, like there will be some emergence. There's a lot of flux right now until these new SVOD players, it becomes predictable. Everyone, like, we're all going to want to put our content on many different platforms. So then, are they paying for it? Or if somebody goes and there's the same content on every platform, there's no differentiation. So there are some, let's say green shoots, but it'll be a couple years until that kind of shakes out, and then there'll be a split between AVOD and SVOD channels.
How many years?
I don't know if we can.
5 or less?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it'd be pretty fast for sure, I think. But just going back to talking about like what you can do to help ensure your success, whether via what marketing strategy or whatever you take. I have maybe a more controversial opinion, but I do encourage a lot of our partners to think about the commercial viability of their projects from the outset, right? Certainly that mantra of knowing your audience and knowing what audience you're going after is very, very critical. Obviously we have passions, we want to tell our stories, we want to be creative, but I think it is extremely important, especially for Canadian producers, to really address the commercial viability outside of our borders and really factor that in from the outset when assembling the ingredients of your project. Because looking at the data that we have in terms of the projects that we've done, whether they're Canadian, US, whatever it happens to be, we see more often than not when those commercial ingredients are in fact in place, those titles do end up performing better. They address their market segment better. They are able to, when they're engaging with your audiences via social media, whatever it is in advance, they tend to have a more resounding, a resounding impact. So I think that's certainly a critical piece.
Just for the last 5 minutes, if there's any questions from the audience, please feel free to let us know. Alan?
I mean, it's still a substantial problem. It especially is a problem here in Canada, of course. It has impacts. We deal with it all the time where filmmakers' films somehow get online. Independent filmmakers' films somehow get online. And that, of course, impacts sales. And it's a notorious problem for the studios. And that's why we see producers try to get their product to market as quickly as possible to try to get ahead of what the inevitable piracy impact's going to be.
But I'm not going to be arguing in favor of piracy, but my wife, who's a producer, said she'll finally know that she's made it as a producer if someone cares enough to pirate her film.
I think is it something to worry? I don't know that it can be how it's addressed. We will get a link that a film is out there. We can try to find the link. I think by having content in as easily accessible that it's just not worth somebody's time to pirate it, or they're watching, with the proliferation of smart TVs. I'd like to think that, I say like to think that most of the market is not going to, just because of ease of options. Or even just if something's 99 cents on iTunes, is it really, do you need to save the 99? For some people, it's a challenge. I know it probably happens more on university colleges getting Game of Thrones than it does for, a lot of the stuff that, you may have. But it's getting in, the ease of access will be one way to combat it at least, and then, there'll be those that will just steal it. Interesting, on YouTube though, they do have something called Content ID. So if anyone puts any clip of your project on YouTube, there's a way to identify who's stolen it, and you can either make them take it down, or you can make revenue from their pirated clip. And we have, somebody stole like a 5-minute clip from a nature show, and we make more money on that pirated clip than he does in VOD revenue.
And and piracy, basically, it encourages the windows to be collapsed so that you make it available to everybody in all formats at the same time, and that's one way to kind of deal with it. And the status quo of maintaining windows for theatrical and VOD and whatever, it benefits most of the stakeholders, producers included, distributors definitely. But so there's going to be a balance, and we'll see how windows change over time. If you make all films available in whatever format the audience wants to see it when they want it, that's one way to combat piracy.
Any other? Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking to a platform in the U.S. that's like experimenting with the idea of using blockchain, the digital signature that'll carry through, and hopefully they think it'll address piracy concerns. Frankly, I think applying blockchain to the financial services sector and other sectors in the economy is probably going to take off first, well before it makes its way into the film industry.
Yeah, there's three companies that I've met with. They pitched it, and I don't have my head around it yet. I mean, it's a great presentation, but I still don't like where does the money come? If people are pirating it and it's like Bitcoin or digital currency, how am I going to get paid? Like tracking it's one thing, but so it's. There's three major companies, one out of Sweden, one out of the States, and another one that we got, I think, out of Israel. And we are talking to them until I understand exactly what the model is. We're not going to do anything yet, but it's out there.
Yeah, the way I see it, I think there's two things about blockchain. There's the technology itself and being able to share revenues in a very transparent and immediate way with many different people. And that can all be registered through Ledger, so we can have access to this information, and everybody can have access to this information. So it clarifies a lot of the dealings. And I think that's one of the things that the actors in the blockchain world are putting forward, saying that the film industry is very obscure and that people don't know and so forth, and then they'll make everything clear and there won't be any more problems. So there's that on one side. The way I see it is that, at least within our company, our systems to report royalty are very transparent. They work quite well. They don't work on blockchain technology. Maybe if we were starting from scratch today, we would choose blockchain technology to develop these tools, or maybe not. But at least we have something that functions quite well, and I don't see why we would scrap that in order to change it for blockchain technology. And the second thing is developing platforms so that people can access content and consume content by paying, using Bitcoins or Ethereum or I don't know what digital currency to pay for the content that they're watching. And on this part, I'm very skeptical. I mean, we have a hard time having people pay dollars to watch movies. I don't see how and why people would suddenly start using Bitcoins through the roof in order to watch films. So at least for us, it's a big wait and see approach.